So for a very long time, having been the last beta character slated for official release, Ayaka has been a highly anticipated and long-awaited addition to the Genshin Impact roster. And now finally, along with the region of Inazuma, Kamisato Ayaka is here. Hello kings, queens, and majesties, welcome to WhaleStat. I am Slice of Otaku. With this video, we will be thoroughly going over everything Ayaka brings to the table and how to go about making the most out of it all. From her best weapons, to artifacts, talents, constellations, and team compositions. If you enjoy this sort of content and would like to see more guides from the channel like it, or even more specified ones, let us know down below in the comments and subscribe to WhaleStat with notifications on. But with that being said, let us begin with a general overview of the character. So Ayaka is more or less best served as a main DPS. Despite being a sword wielder, she's kinda like a catalyst user in the sense that she can virtually always provide elemental damage. She hits really hard and several times at that. Truly, she has very quickly become my favorite cryo character to play. Although to be fair, I do really enjoy playing Eula, but Eula is far more physically oriented than cryo, so it is hard to classify her in that way. When it comes to talents, before we even touch on basic attacks, we need to discuss her dash, Kamisato Art Senho. It's pretty much like a cryo version of Mona's, and I love it. Truthfully, Mona's in the past felt a bit clunky to me, but in preparation for Ayaka's release, they spruced things up a bit, and it feels great. And more than that, by doing so, her weapon becomes infused with cryo for 5 seconds. Not only is this like Mona's movement, but it also bears a similarity to Chongyun's elemental skill. And the moment Ayaka emerges from this state, she applies cryo to anyone close enough, which serves to set up cryo elemental reactions without even attacking, which is nice. Especially in the case of Freeze, because between Cryo Team Resonance and the Blizzard Slayer set, you'll be working with an incredibly heightened crit rate, but more on that in a bit. The movement with this dash is incredible, as unlike typical running animations for most characters, it does not suffer from that unfortunate end lag, allowing you to seamlessly transition to your next course of action that much smoother. As for her normal, charged, and plunged attacks, thanks to that aforementioned dash, we'll pretty much always be dealing with cryo damage, which is amazing. But let me tell you, that charge attack of hers is quite possibly the best in the game. I love it, I really do. If we are talking style points, it is the most anime sword move ever. Ayaka wields, slashes, and sheaths her blade faster than the eye can see, and enemies are absolutely shredded. And at that, there is a decent bit of range to it away from her body, and it hits more than once very rapidly without any damage discrepancy, and so groups of enemies can all catch the work at once. Personally, I tend to throw in about 2 normal attacks followed by a charge attack, dash to maintain the cryo infusion, and repeat. Next up, we have Ayaka's elemental skill, which is incredibly simple. She causes a sudden rush of AoE cryo damage centered on her position. It's pretty much like Kaya's elemental skill, but instead of a single target or straight line, it is an AoE. With a 10-second cooldown, it's not the fastest thing ever, so it's not to be relied on too much, but boy oh boy does it pack a punch when it is available. Even at low levels, this skill does a lot of damage, and because it is so quick, it's really easy to incorporate into your move rotation, and if you're switching around to different characters, it will more than likely be ready by the time you switch back to Ayaka. After that, we have Ayaka's elemental burst, which is magnificent. Ayaka creates a traveling snowstorm that rips apart anything in its path and concludes things with an explosion of AoE cryo damage. This is a very powerful elemental burst for sure. However, with an energy cost of 80, it will take some time to build up, and so in that regard, Ayaka will definitely need some assistance. In regards to passives, firstly we have Amatsumi Kunitsumi Sanctification. After using her elemental skill, Ayaka's normal and charge attacks deal an additional 30% damage for 6 seconds. And this is something that makes that elemental skill of hers that much more impressive and worth using at any given opportunity. After that, we have Kanten Senmyo Blessing. When the cryo application that comes at the end of Ayaka's movement hits an opponent, Ayaka has 10 stamina restored to herself and receives a 18% cryo damage bonus for 10 seconds. This passive is so incredibly good that it almost feels like cheating. Obviously, between all the dashing and constant charge attacks, we are looking at a whole lot of stamina consumption here, so being able to offset that even just a little bit is perfect. But then, That 18% addition to cryo damage is next level because that too should be constant. There is no limitation or cool off to this, making it accessible at all times. But now moving on to constellations, to me personally, Ayaka's constellation path is okay. It's not the greatest and it's not the worst, it is just fine. Obviously, constellations are a luxury and far from a necessity, but truly in Ayaka's case, as far as I'm concerned, you are not missing out on much being C0 or otherwise. At C1, we have Snow Swept Sakura. When Ayaka's normal or charge attacks deal cryo damage to opponents, there is a 50% chance of decreasing the skill's cooldown by 0.3 seconds. An effect that may occur once every millisecond. This constellation is more quality of life enrichment than anything else. Ayaka's elemental skill hits hard, as we've said, and provides a 30% damage bonus for 6 seconds. The more frequently you can use it, the better. Especially with her burst having such a demanding energy requirement, despite a 10-second wait between skills. For me, I appreciate constellations that make the use of a character's kit that much more efficient and smooth, and so I did pick up her C1 and stopped at that. At Constellation 2, we have Blizzard Blade Seki no To. Ayaka's elemental burst now produces 2 additional cyclones of cryo damage, which each deal 20% of the original burst damage. This pretty much results in a 40% increase to damage here, which is certainly nothing to scoff at. However, being able to make complete use of that 40% may not be all too consistent considering how the burst works and travels. At C4, we see this very addition furthered, as enemies hit by them will have their defenses decreased by 30% for 6 seconds. This is again a nice buff to damage, but does require those smaller torrents to hit. Extra damage is always nice, but that's about all this constellation provides. But lastly, with C6, we have Dance of Suigetsu. Every 10 seconds, Ayaka will have her charge attack damage increased by 298%. And this buff is then cleared half a second after it hits an opponent and the timer is reset. To signify this, Ayaka's hand begins to glow blue, which is nice, but again, this is completely damage oriented. With 10 seconds being just as frequent as her elemental skill, it is something that should in theory be used just as commonly. Ayaka's constellations aren't anything groundbreaking and don't inspire any new playstyles or open any previously inaccessible doors. If you want to see absurd damage from the character that badly, then be my guest, but I'd say that for most people, even those willing to gather constellations for a 5-star, besides maybe her C1, it is not really worth it. But now with that out of the way, let us move on to her weapons. Now in regards to 4 stars, I am fond of a few in Ayaka's hands. Chief among them to me being the Black Sword. This increases normal and charge attacks by 20% and additionally regenerates 60% of attack as HP when normal or charge attacks trigger crits. And this can happen once every 5 seconds. Now with a substat of crit rate percentage on a character benefiting from cryo resonance, you may find yourself with crit rate in surplus. You obviously do not want to exceed that 100% threshold, and so this will take a bit of planning in regards to artifacts so that you are allocating your stats appropriately. But yeah, with pretty much guaranteed crits, that is a constant flow of self-healing, which is a very nice bonus. To follow this, we have Black Cliff Longsword. After defeating an opponent, attack is increased by 12% for 30 seconds for a maximum of 3 independently timed stacks. And the substat here is crit damage. Because you're likely to have a very high crit rate, upping that crit damage only makes sense. Now to truly benefit from this weapon, you will want to be up against several enemies at once as opposed to a singular boss. And overall, this is just a very solid weapon for her to wield. And I mean, something like the flute isn't bad on her either, but with how accessible the previous 2 may be, you're better off just going for one of those. Now as for 5-star weapons, most obviously the weapon featured on the banner that came out with hers is the best currently available. Miss Splitter Reforged is amazing. First of all, it provides a rainbow elemental damage buff of 12%. From there, we have what are known as emblems. Emblems provide an additional elemental damage bonus for the character's corresponding element. In this case, cryo, and you're able to have a maximum of 3 stacks, which are all obtained in different ways. Firstly, when your normal attack deals elemental damage, which is constant for Ayaka thanks to her movement, you will receive a stack which provides us an 8% cryo damage bonus. This particular sort of emblem lasts for 5 seconds, which is precisely how long the weapon will be infused with cryo anyways, so that is great. From there, we have when energy is less than 100%, which is when your elemental burst isn't ready, also providing a stack, which brings us up to 16% cryo damage bonus. And pretty much all the time, we will be able to maintain these 2 stacks. Now, to obtain the 3rd stack, we will need to use our elemental burst. And this one in particular lasts for 10 seconds. So more often than not, we will only be making use of 2 stacks, but for 10 seconds a pop, we will see use from all 3, which brings us up to 28% cryo damage bonus. And now add in that 12% we talked about with the rainbow buff, and we see a maximum of 40% additional cryo damage, which is massive. Then have your dash touch an enemy, which you are of course going to do, and we are looking at a 58% cryo damage bonus without a single artifact on us. This sword also provides a substat of crit damage, which of course pairs beautifully with our expected high crit rate. If you are using this sword, you'll want to pop that elemental burst as quickly and as frequently as you possibly can to make the most out of it. And right now, Ayaka is virtually the only character that can make use of this weapon by her lonesome. The exception being the likes of Kazuha, but for that, you would need him at C6, so again, the value of C0 Ayaka is not to be understated. It is to the point where if you are considering getting her a Constellation, then I would say that rather than getting her to C1, you should probably go for this weapon instead and keep her at C0. But if not Mist Splitter, Summit Shaper is also ridiculously good. After hitting an opponent, your attack will be increased by 4% for 8 seconds, once every 0.3 seconds, up to a maximum stack of 5. This also increases shield strength by 20%, and while protected by a shield, this attack benefits from an additional 100% buff. So we are looking at a potential bonus of 120% attack if paired with a shielding character. That is absolutely ludicrous. And with a subset of attack, I really wish I had this weapon. But just a step down from that, we have the good old Primordial Jade Cutter. Such a solid weapon. HP is increased by 20%, and you receive an attack bonus equal to 1.2% of your max HP. It also possesses a substat of crit rate, so just like before with the Black Sword, you'll want to be careful not to exceed 100% crit rate for obvious reasons, so plan accordingly. And with that in mind, let's plan our artifacts, shall we? So in terms of artifacts, in regards to Ayaka, her best setup is no doubt a 4-piece Blizzard Slayer by a long shot. That is a 15% cryo damage bonus for 2-piece, and with 4-piece, when attacking an opponent afflicted with cryo, which will be anyone Ayaka hits, she will benefit from a crit rate increase of 20. And if they are frozen, make that 40%. But if for whatever reason you are already set on crit rate and that much would be excessive for you, go ahead and run her 2-piece Blizzard Slayer, 2-piece Gladiator, or 2-piece Shimenawa's Reminiscence. Both provide a 18% buff to attack, so pick your poison. Beyond that, getting into specifics, for her sands, we will want attack percentage. For her goblet, typically cryo damage. However, it is important to remember that when it comes to Genshin Impact, there is such a thing as diminishing returns in regards to stats. Now, contrary to common misconception, this isn't to say that the benefits begin to necessarily trail off, but rather that too much of a good thing may at times be a bad thing simply because you ultimately neglect other areas and are therefore not optimally built. And so just like with crit rate, if between Mist Splitter, potential teammates, her passives, and 2-piece Blizzard you are rocking out with more than enough cryo damage percentage, I suggest running an attack goblet instead. Then lastly, for her circlet, you will more than likely want to go crit damage, but if you cannot manage to accumulate a minimum of 15% crit rate bonus from artifact substats or your weapon of choice to be coupled with our 15% from Cryo Resonance and the 40% from 4-piece Blizzard and Freeze, then sure, go crit rate, as 70% is the sweet spot of sorts. As for substats, attack percentage, crit damage, and just enough crit rate are the clear winners. And with such a high energy cost for her burst, energy recharge cannot hurt either. But yeah, that's enough about her artifacts. Now it is time for team comps. So my go-to Ayaka team is generally Ayaka, Kazuha, Diona, and Xingqiu. I absolutely adore Kazuha, as many of you know by now, so having him on any team is wonderful, although he is going to be different from how I usually play him, as he is going to be acting as a sub DPS as opposed to a main DPS. Being able to group enemies up for Ayaka to slaughter is great, not to mention that Ascension 4 skill of his, Poetics of Fubutsu. Anytime Kazuha causes a swirl reaction, we are looking at a 0.04% damage bonus to the element's world for every point of elemental mastery he himself possesses. So for example, at an easily achieved 200% elemental mastery, that is an additional 8% cryo damage bonus that lasts for 8 seconds. What is essentially a stack of Mist Splitter's emblems in and of itself. Beyond that, he also has a passive which reduces the stamina cost of sprinting by 20%, which is certainly appreciated, as between all the running and charge attacks, stamina can at times run a bit low with Ayaka. If you have him at C1, that's more constant swirling, and at C2, that is 200 points of elemental mastery when you use his burst, which again provides what is equivalent to an 8% cryo damage bonus. And speaking of his burst, because it can swirl cryo and hydro, that just makes your freeze up time that much longer. Now do bear in mind that if you are going heavy elemental mastery investment here, he won't be much in the way of damage himself, but that's alright when Ayaka herself is able to put up some crazy numbers. But instead of Kazuha, you can also go with Venti, who is also incredible. I mean, come on, this is the god of crowd control and will set up your enemies for Ayaka like some bowling ball pins. And there is also the fact that his Ascension 4 skill makes energy accumulation even easier for Ayaka, and we really want that for such a powerful yet high costing burst. And as for his burst, thankfully, he doesn't lift enemies too high up for her to reach, and so she can put in that work just fine. And certainly if you do not have either of these 5-star characters available to you, Sucrose is far from a bad idea. She may not be the best for a freeze team, but that's alright because what she can do, she does very well. Now as for the other half of that cryo resonance we keep talking about, first up we have Diona, my favorite healer in the game, who thanks to that sacrificial bow, makes for an absolutely amazing battery for Ayaka and makes getting that burst so much easier. I mean, if you are rocking out with Summit Shaper, her shields will lead you to the promised land. Her shields also reduce stamina consumption by 10%, which is nice again, because we do need that stamina. And if you have Diona at C6, pair her with Kazuha and he will benefit from a 200 point elemental mastery increase, which he can then convert to 8% additional cryo damage for Ayaka. And ultimately that sort of elemental mastery buff can be good with any of our anima supports, and of course, healing is nice as well. Kaya is also a viable choice that I for one have been enjoying, as with that shotgun of an elemental skill he has, he may act as a very speedy battery for Ayaka and can provide a good chunk of damage himself. But depending on what you're up against, you may at times miss that damage mitigation that comes from Diona. But other than these two, Rosaria is nice, but that crit rate addition may be excessive. Ganyu is stupid powerful of course, and that 20% cryo damage bonus while within her burst is wonderful for Ayaka. And Chongyun, although not ideal on a freeze team because of the whole shattering thing, has merits of his own, like being a battery when paired with Sacrificial Greatsword, and at C2 there's that skill and burst cooldown reduction that he has. But lastly, for the sake of freezing, we will need a Hydro character. Xingqiu is best when it comes to this, as the freeze he provides is damn near constant and you don't need him on the field to provide that sweet assistance. Beyond him, we have Mona, who as a burst support just makes Ayaka's damage that much more insane. However, she won't be as good as Xingqiu as single target Hydro application. That being said, Mona is in a better state than ever thanks to the contents of update 2.0, which we will get into in another video. And if you have nobody else, there is always Barbara, in which case you will have heals for days. But yeah guys, that just about does it for Ayaka's build. In the comments, we would love to know how you have been or intend to use her, so please let us know. There is plenty more to be covered, not only with Ayaka, but with Genshin Impact in general, and so if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to Whalestat with notifications on. I have been your host, Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.